Okay, let's do it. The events of The Nun 2 take place 4 years after the events of the first Nun. We open up at this church in France where we meet this altar boy named Jacques. While he and the priest are in the church one night, they look up and they see Valak. And then the priest literally just levitates and spontaneously combusts into flames. So then we flash to Sister Irene, who obviously we know from the first movie. She's now a nun and she's serving at a convent in Italy. She befriends this young novitiate named Sister Deborah. One day she hears all the nuns talking about how a few years prior, Father Burke and this unknown nun went and defeated this demon in Romania. Obviously, they're talking about Sister Irene, but they don't know that it was her. We also then catch up with our friend Maurice, who we know from the first Nun is very much possessed. He works at this boarding school in France where he befriends this woman named Kate and her daughter Sophie. One night, Irene has a vision of Valak, and then she sees an image of Maurice saying, "Save me." And when she wakes up the next morning, there is a cardinal that has come to the convent to meet with her. He tells her that since what happened in Romania, there have been a series of deaths that are traveling along Europe, starting in Romania. The most recent one being the spontaneous combustion. And they know that these are all attributed to Valak, and since she's the only person alive who has dealt with it because they drop on her that Father Burke has died, she needs to go investigate. She says no, but they don't give her a fucking choice. So she sets out for France where the combustion happened, and Sister Deborah goes along with her. They get to the church where it happened, and they see this painting of St. Lucy, which we saw Jacques look at earlier. And Irene explains to Deborah that St. Lucy was martyred, and they tried to burn her, but she wouldn't burn. So they took her eyes out and killed her like with a sword. Irene has this really creepy vision of Valak. Honestly, I'm not crazy about this movie, but this scene fucking rips. This image of Valak shows up in all these magazines that start flipping pages. And when Irene turns around, Valak is standing right behind her and attacks her. She ends up escaping, and her and Deborah locate Jacques, who gives them a rosary that belonged to the priest that set on fire. Meanwhile, back at the boarding school, we see that Sophie is getting ruthlessly bullied by this group of little bitches. And one day they lock her in this sealed off chapel. There's this game that they play here where there is this stained glass window with this goat on it. And when the sun hits it just right, its eyes glow red, and they say that if you look away, the devil will show up and possess you. Sophie briefly sees Valak, but she manages to make it out of the chapel. We learn that the chapel is sealed off because the madam, who was like the head of the boarding school, she had a son who died in that chapel years prior. One night, the madam is lured into the chapel by the voice of her son, and when she gets in there, Valak attacks her and offs her. So Irene and Deborah travel to the Catholic archives to find any sort of information that they can, and they show them the rosary that they got from Jacques from the priest that burned. He explains that the emblem that is on this rosary is the family crest of St. Lucy. After her eyes were gouged out, it said that her family found them and then fled and kind of spaced themselves out around Europe. And he suggests that the people who are being killed are probably descendants of St. Lucy that the demon is targeting because it wants some sort of relic. That relic being the eyes of St. Lucy. He explains to Irene and Deborah that through his studies, he has discovered that the last known location of this relic was at this monastery. But this monastery has since closed and is now a boarding school. Yup, this boarding school. So Irene and Deborah arrive at the boarding school where they come face to face with Maurice, who throughout this whole movie has been becoming like increasingly more and more possessed and bizarre. And when they show up, he goes full demon mode, full-blown possessed. They manage to chain him up and restrain him, and Kate and Sophie take them into the chapel. They flash a light through the goat, and sure enough, when its eyes glow red, it points at the spot on the floor. And when Irene looks at that spot, sure enough, she finds the eyes of St. Lucy buried. But when they look up, they see that the goat is gone and has now manifested as a demonic creature in real life. The creature proceeds to attack Deborah, who is gone to find the other girls in the boarding school, some of which are the ones that bullied Sophie, so let it have them. A now very possessed Maurice follows Sophie to this bell tower and corners her, but the bell in the tower ends up collapsing. Irene runs in to try and save Sophie, where she comes face to face with Valak once again. Valak lifts Irene in the air, similar to what she did to the priest earlier, and Irene starts to set on fire from the bottom up. However, Irene does not burn. And it's at this point we understand that Irene doesn't burn because she is a descendant of St. Lucy. And that's why she has the visions that she has. And she's also not burning because she is holding the eyes of St. Lucy on her, which is allowing her to harness that power. Valak eventually lets Irene go and she falls to the floor, and she and Deborah notice that there have been some wine jugs that have burst open and there's wine all over the ground. Irene and Deborah get down and start praying the words of institution, which is the prayer they do in church to convert the wine into the blood of Christ. And sure enough, that converts the wine into the blood of Christ, which then vanquishes Valak once again. And it frees Maurice of the possession that he was under. Sometime later, Maurice is all well and good. He reconnects with Kate and Sophie. Irene looks on nervously as Maurice walks away with Kate and Sophie, knowing very well that this is not the end for him.